Welcome to exercise 7, HDR images. That's what we're going to be doing for this part of the exercise. I'm just going to open up these 3 images. You don't have to do this, but you should download these exercise 7 image files and you will see these 3 HDR images, which you will use for this part of the exercise. So what HDR stands for, what it means is high dynamic range. And when you think about if you were actually viewing a scene such as this, our eyes have an extremely high dynamic range. We can see, of course, color. We can see a huge range of light in, anything that we're viewing. But cameras can tend to have a little bit of trouble seeing that same range. So of course, when we're taking photographs, we want to be able to portray them as realistically as possible and give, a similar range that the natural eye would see. So cameras, of course, have some limitations when it comes to high dynamic range. And in this example, we're showing how you can take images at different exposures and then combine them in Photoshop to give them the full range of light that you would see if you were there in person. So for example, these images were taken with a tripod of the same scene, but at different times of day. So you can see we have a more exposed image of the foreground and the buildings here. This is sort of our mid-tone image where we can see a bit more of the sky, whereas it was really overly exposed and kind of blown out in this first image because there's just no way to focus on both of those areas with the camera at once. And then we also have a darker image here with lower exposure so that we can see more of the light in the sky and the water. So we're going to be combining these 3 images to give it that full high dynamic range so that you're able to focus on all of these different areas of the image at once. So we'll be combining these in Photoshop. So you will start by just opening Photoshop. You don't need to create a new file. You don't need to open these images quite yet. You're going to start with just your blank Photoshop interface. Go to File, Automate, and then merge to HDR Pro. And you'll see this little modal window pop up here that once again says merge to HDR Pro. And then just make sure that Files is selected here. You'll click Browse. Once again, this is why file organization is so key, not only in this class, but in life. And I know exactly where these 3 files are that I need, so I'm going to that place or I'm browsing for them within Photoshop. I select the first file, which is _over, and then I'm holding Shift on my keyboard and selecting the last file so that it selects all 3 files at once. And then I click Open, and you can see it's added all 3 of those files here. Once you do that, you will hit OK. And it just sort of showed me the Photoshop interface as if I were opening these as separate layers, but then it might take a minute or 2, but then it should show this modal here that once again says merge to HDR Pro 100% at the top. And it's almost similar to the camera raw modal if you remember that. There are some similar options in here. And we're going to be making just a few adjustments before we combine these images and open them as a single layer in Photoshop. So you should have something that looks like this. And one of the most important things that you're going to want to do here is check this little box that says remove ghosts. And you can see if you hover over that, it says removes ghosts caused by moving objects, because you can see in these 3 images, there is always going to be some movement when you're taking imagery like this. So even though you have the camera in the same place, of course you can't control things like the sky, the clouds moving, the water moving, for example. So if you check remove ghosts, you'll see that it helps to kind of align that movement into one image and create something that looks a lot more realistic and a lot better for this example. So make sure you check that on. Also, just make sure that your mode is 16-bit and local adaptation. We don't want to mess around with the bit too much, especially if you're going into 32-bit. That can really slow down your computer. So just make sure you have 16-bit here. That's the highest that you need. And then feel free to play around with some of these presets. You'll see at the top it says preset custom. Your preset will always change as you apply some different effects to it, as we are going to do. But you know, you can always double check. You can see how you can make a monochromatic image here. There's lots of different kind of cool presets. Selecting the different presets might uncheck that remove ghost box, so just be mindful of that. But for this exercise, we're all just going to be using this saturated preset. So you can select that. Once again, it's kind of funky, but you have to check remove ghosts again. So just make sure you've selected saturated, and remove ghosts should look something like this. Once again, because we've hit remove ghosts, it's going to change that preset back to custom, but that's okay. So those are those first couple of things that you're going to do here. And then we're going to be adjusting the edge glow here and these other tools below it. So starting with edge glow, you can see if you just sort of toggle and mess around with this, you can see this is affecting kind of the glow of pixels along the edges. The strength, you can see if I really increase that, it's almost kind of sharpening and de-sharpening my image. The radius, we want to keep a little bit lower, about 26 here. I'm just going to actually take it back to where I had it. So 26 for radius under edge glow. And the strength, I'm going to bring that up just a little. And these are pretty subtle adjustments. Oops, you can kind of toggle them around to see what they do, but we're just making pretty subtle, more natural adjustments here. So once again, radius is at 26, and I've changed the strength to 0.53. Gamma, once again, you can mess around with these to see what they do. I think I'm gonna leave gamma at 1. Exposure, I will leave at 0. But exposure, we talked about, you can really lighten up the exposure, get sort of a more blown out image there, or you can really darken it as well. But in this case, because we're combining these multiple exposures, I think just leaving that where it is looks good. So leaving exposure at 0. Detail, we might want to increase a little bit. So you can see if I really bring this up, you're getting a really sharp effect on this image. We're not going to go that crazy with it. We're going to put detail at about 38. And now we'll take a look at these advanced options in this tab at the bottom here. We are going to increase the shadows just a little bit to about 16. Once again, you can kind of toggle and see what this does. You can see that this is only affecting the darkest parts of the image here. We don't want to go too crazy, so about 16 on shadows. Highlights, we're going to bring down a little bit to kind of tone down some of this blown out area in the image. We'll bring that down to about -10 there. Vibrance, going to leave that as is. It might look a little bit different for you. Leave that at 55%. Saturation, I'm also going to leave where it is currently at 25, but you could kind of mess around with it. You can see how you could create a really saturated image if you wish. But for this exercise, we're going to leave that pretty natural at 25. And that is all you will be updating in this modal, this part of the interface. So just take a look at what we did here. So once again, we selected that preset saturated option. It now says custom because we made some changes to it. Just make sure to check remove ghosts. That's probably the most important edit that you're making here. Make sure your mode is 16-bit with local adaptation. The radius under edge glow should be 26. Strength is 0.53. Gamma under tone and detail is 1. Exposure we left at 0. Detail is 38%. And then under advanced, we increase the shadows to 16%, highlight is -10%, vibrance is 55%, and saturation is 25%. So you should have something that looks like this, and then you can click OK. And that will open, just gonna hide my little timeline here, that will open the image in, combining all of those edits that we just made as a single layer in Photoshop. So if you're doing something like this for your own work, you can of course keep editing, add adjustment layers, masking anything that you're trying to add into this image here. But that's just a really quick sort of automated process that Photoshop does for us to combine separate images into a single high dynamic range image. So hopefully you find this useful for your projects. And then go ahead and save this file for your records using the traditional naming conventions that we've done in the class, and export this as a JPEG to turn in. And that was exercise 7 HDR images.